Dr. Dean Ornish is a best-selling author and doctor. His teachings educate us on how to lead a healthy lifestyle and live a more fulfilling life. Join me now as I talk to Dr. Dean Ornish and get to the heart of the matter. Hello, I'm Dr. Gail Gross. Welcome to the show. I'm delighted you could join me. My guest today is Dr. Dean Ornish. He is president and director of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute. He has written 5 best-selling books on health and nutrition, including his latest, Love and Survival. He has worked with both the President of the United States and the White House chefs to create healthier, more nutritious meals for the most important person in our country. A 1-hour documentary on his work has been featured on the PBS show Nova, and he was selected by Life magazine as one of the 50 most outstanding and influential members of his generation, and he is a member of the board of the Quincy Jones Listen Up Foundation. Today, we are going to talk about an alarming problem with Dr. Ornish facing our children, obesity. And the Surgeon General said that it was #1 as problems go in our country. Welcome, Dean.
Thanks, Gail. It's great to be here.
Good to see you. Well, what about that? What about obesity? What's happening? What's going wrong?
Well, it's not just children, it's also adults. 60% of adults are overweight, obese. 13% of kids are. And it's affecting the health of our nation. Did you know that in the last 10 years that diabetes in 30-year-olds has gone up by 70%?
Wow.
It used to be called adult onset or childhood, juvenile onset diabetes, and now those terms don't even apply because so many kids are getting what used to be called adult onset diabetes, which to a large degree is a function of being overweight.
Yes, that's amazing, and I guess kids really do learn what they see, and they mimic their parents, and their parents are in the same trap.
That's right.
And then, of course, we have the entertainment industry showing us so many delicious things on television. I mean, I can barely sit in my seat at a commercial.
Well, not only what you see on television, but the fact that you're watching television or you're using video games. Kids used to go out and exercise. They used to play games with each other. In schools, they used to offer physical education. And I think one of the most short-sighted things that's happening in our schools is that when the schools have budget crunches, what do they cut out? They cut out physical education and they cut out arts and music. And I think those are probably 2 of the most critical things that can help both in the health and development of our kids.
So they're not really extracurricular, and they're not really frills. They're really the most important things to our health and well-being.
That's
and
right.
Without those, everything else falls short.
Well, one feeds our body and the other feeds our soul. We need both.
And how do we approach this as parents? You know, sugar is so intoxicating. It just catches you and you just want more and more. I think if I have a little sugar, I want it for about 48 hours. I just can't stop at that one chocolate candy. How do kids do that? How do they actually stop themselves? What can we as parents and teachers and even just adults that are concerned do to change that idea for children?
I think, you know, the best teacher is always a good example. And depending on the age of your child, I think you need to approach it in different ways. And when you have a child, they tend to develop their taste preferences in childhood. So by serving healthy foods, but of course kids emulate their parents.
Right.
And so it's like you can't be smoking and say, no, you know, you shouldn't be smoking. Just like you can't be eating a really horrible diet and expect that your kids will be eating a healthy one.
I love this line, be what you want to see. And it's really true. Simple but true.
It's true.
Well, in our culture, I think soft drinks, for example, have become almost a candy or a candy substitute. There's so much sugar in everything we do. There's so much fat in everything we eat, all the fast foods. I mean, kids just think every food comes with a toy. Yeah. And our life is so hectic. Both parents often work, have to work. How do we get over this? How do we make it hip to be fit?
You know, one of the best lifestyle modification programs are advertisers, except they're not using that power to help necessarily. They're using it to sell products, even if those products aren't necessarily very helpful for people. There's no reason we can't use those same tools and techniques in a more healthful and in a healing way even. I mean, so often people think, you know, oh, it's boring to eat healthy food. You know, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer if I eat this way? I want to have fun in my life. And the images that we have, I mean, what are the things in not only advertisements, but in movies and so on? Advertisers pay a lot of money for their products to be placed in television and movies, to have the actors, the celebrities, the beautiful people using these products. Again, because people see them, they want to be like them, and that's why it's worth it to do that. But we can change that. You know, right now, people think it's hip to smoke, to use stimulants like cocaine, to not exercise, to be stressed out. And yet, when you actually look at the literature, the scientific studies, those behaviors are what leave people feeling tired, lethargic, depressed, and even impotent. You know, I mean, how fun is that? When you change your diet, when you stop smoking, when you stop using stimulants, when you meditate and do yoga, when you exercise, your brain actually gets more blood. You think more clearly. You have more energy. You need less sleep. Your heart gets more blood in ways we've actually measured in our studies in adults with people who have even severe heart disease to the point they need a bypass or an angioplasty. Most people have been able to avoid that by simply changing their diet and lifestyle. So clearly, if you can reverse it, then you can prevent it even easier.
You know, Dean, in one of your earliest books, you write about the shoulds and shouldn'ts and how that really makes people resist change. And it shouldn't be should and shouldn't, but rather it should be about choice.
That's right.
How do you do that? How do you make that model for kids?
Well, because even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And I think that's true of adults and it's true of kids. And of course, it's especially true of teenagers. And so anytime, if I used to try to scare people into changing, you know, like the Surgeon General's warning, smoking causes emphysema, heart disease, you know, all kinds of horrible things. And people kind of go, man, I don't want to think about that.
And they don't.
And they don't. You know, maybe when someone's had a crisis and they end up in the emergency room, they'll do anything for about a month or two. But even then, the denial comes back. Because, you know, we're all going to die. It's just a question of when. The mortality rate is still 100%. It's one per person. But it's not something we think about most of the time because it's too scary. So I've just learned the hard way from making a lot of mistakes that if I ever try to motivate people to change out of fear of dying, it really doesn't work that well. But whereas fear of dying doesn't work that well, joy of living actually works really well. And so what I emphasize are not the bad things that might happen to you 30 years from now if you don't change, or the heart attack that doesn't come, you know, that you live to be 90 instead of 89. That doesn't do it, even, you know, even when you're 89. People want to feel better. They say things like, you know, I don't care if I live longer. I want to enjoy my life. I say, great, you know what? I want to enjoy my life too. And there's no point in giving up something that you like unless you get something back that's better. And not 30 years later, but a week or two later. And the paradox is that, you know, one of the most effective anti-smoking campaigns in California was the Department of Health Services had these big billboards with a Marlboro Man kind of actor with a limp cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and the headline was, "Smoking causes impotence." Not that it causes emphysema, but impotence, which is a big problem for adults. That got their attention because the very things that we think of as being so hip and cool in our culture, if you look at the media, if you look at advertising campaigns, smoking, cocaine, being stressed out, eating fatty foods, you know, drinking to excess, and so on, are the very things that leave so many guys, particularly when they're older, tired, lethargic, depressed, and impotent. You know, how fun is that? When you change your diet, when you quit smoking, when you meditate, do yoga, exercise, etc., your brain actually gets more blood, so you think more clearly, you have more energy, you feel better, you don't need as much sleep.
They have more energy and they feel more alive.
That's right.
And I think another issue is adolescents have so many mood swings based on what's going on in their biology, the hormones that are just pumping, you know, every 90 minutes, that testosterone in the boy and estrogen in the girl, and all these foods affect that as well. Hypoglycemic is actually affected by sugar, and kids take so much sugar, and all of these bipolar issues that are impacted by fish oil, and we know that blueberries can really increase your brain power and make you feel better. So food, in a sense, can be used as a healing and actually a way to impact adolescence, as you say, mood and food.
Food can affect your mood.
Your mood.
And it's not just sugar, but caffeine. When you're drinking colas, you're getting both. And when you don't get something for nothing in biology, you know, that when you get caffeine, your energy level zooms up, But then it's like a pendulum. It doesn't just, you pull it to one side, it doesn't just stop in the middle, it goes back to the other side. So you get that spike in energy and then you crash later in the day. Well, there's a good cure for that real low feeling, which is more caffeine. Or if you're on a more extreme, more amphetamines or more cocaine, those kind of swings become even greater. And when you get that low, tired, low blood sugar feeling, or when the caffeine wears off, you feel tired, you feel lethargic, you want more of it. That's where the cycle, the vicious cycle comes from. On the other hand, when you're eating whole grains, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, they're very rich in fiber, you're not only avoiding these substances that tend to promote disease and promote lack of attention and so on, but you're getting, and you made reference to some, at least 1,000 others that are protective, that increase your ability to learn, that protect you from getting heart disease and cancer in later life. But again, those are things that kids relate to. They relate to feeling better, you look better, your skin looks better, you don't gain weight. Those are things that really matter more. As they get older, their sexual function improves. Their ability to concentrate improves. It's like anything. There's no point, I mean, I just had, my wife Molly and I had our first baby.
Lucas. And I was going to ask you, as a new dad, how would you implement these things in your own household when Lucas, say, for example, is a teenager and he says, well, Dad, everybody drinks a diet drink, or everybody drinks a soda, or eats candy or cake, and then other parents who feel guilty about restricting their child make you feel guilty for restricting yours. So how do you influence your child when the whole world from the outside is influencing them in another way?
Well,
what will you do? I want to know.
Clearly these issues have become much more meaningful since becoming a dad. And, sometimes when I lecture, I'll say to people, how many of you have kids? And people raise their hands. I say, was that a big change in your lifestyle? And people say, oh yeah, it was really hard. Was it harder than you thought? Oh yeah. Well, how many of you have more than one child? People raise their hands. I say, well, did you forget? It's like the first time you can say, well, I didn't know. But still, people, having a child is the biggest lifestyle change for most people. And yet people do it every day, and they sometimes have more than one child because it's worth it. And that's part of what I've learned, is that people are not afraid to make big changes in their lifestyle, including their diet and exercise and so on, if they think it's worth it, and if the benefits occur quickly. And I think that's what we have to keep coming back to. It's not about forbidding people to do things. I'm not going to forbid Lucas to have a soft drink or chocolate or, those kinds of things. I eat chocolate myself. I love chocolate, but I just have a little bit,
Moderation.
Right. And if I had heart disease, I wouldn't do that, but I don't. And the same is true for kids. They don't generally have heart disease if they're eating a moderate diet. So again, it's a question of saying, not that we're not going to ever feed you this stuff, but in our home, this is what we eat, And if you want to live here, you can eat with us. We'd love to have you. And again, it's not even just the food, but the community, the family, the nurturing, the environment becomes so important. So many studies show that what we're really lacking in our culture is not just diet problems, but the lack of support, loneliness, depression, isolation, alienation. These are the real epidemics in our culture, not just obesity. Obesity, in some ways, to me, is a symptom of that. It's like the canary in the mine. It's the tip of the iceberg. If we only approach obesity as a problem, it's not going to work that well. We have to see it in a larger context. In doing the studies that my colleagues and I have been doing for 25 years, we spend a lot of time with the same group of patients, sometimes over a period of decades, and we get to know them really well and trust each other. And so I'd say to them, hey, teach me something. Why are you overweight? Why do you eat so much? Why do you smoke? Why do you abuse alcohol or other drugs? Why do you work so hard? Why do you, spend so much time watching television or working on your Game Boys or Nintendo? These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me. And they'd say, Dean, you don't have a clue. And they'd say, you don't get it. You just don't get it. I said, okay, well, teach me. Why are you doing these things? They said, these behaviors, they're not maladaptive, they're very adaptive because they help us get through the day. And for many people, just getting through the day is a lot more important than worrying about, gaining a few pounds or living a few years shorter, or getting sick. They say things like, I don't care if I die, I've got to make it through the day. One woman said, I've got 20 friends in this package of cigarettes. They're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? They eat when they're depressed.
Yes, filling that hole and filling the loneliness, and kids especially go through that, especially in adolescence.
Especially in adolescence when it's such a crazy, lonely time anyway. A well-known food writer said, when I get depressed, I eat a lot of fat. It coats my nerves and numbs the pain. or people use alcohol or other drugs to numb the pain, or they work too hard, or they watch too much television, or spend too much time on the internet. We have lots of ways in our culture of numbing or killing or distracting ourselves from emotional pain, bypassing pain literally and figuratively. But the pain is not the problem, it's the messenger. It's saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And so it's not simply that we have to say to people, oh, eat less food. It's like people go, duh, you know.
Right.
I mean, if you tell a kid, well, you're fat, you're eating too much, like they don't know that, you know.
Right.
Or telling somebody who smokes, you know, smoking isn't good for you. It's like, well, thank you very much, you know, like, like duh, you know.
Exactly.
So providing people with information is important.
Education is the key.
But it's not enough just to talk about the behaviors or the risks. We have to work at a deeper level, of the level of loneliness and depression and isolation. And that's where, you know, the breakdown of social networks that's happened
Yes.
really plays a role in that. But part of what we can do is recreate that.
So it's seeing the person as a whole thing, a holistic approach in a sense, mind, body, and spirit. And kids, I wonder if we reached a time where kids don't even know what it feels like to feel normal. What is that place without the caffeine and without the sweets? Because we've made such a maladaptive diet, and our novelty eating has become a style where primitive man, our little hunter-gatherer, went through generations before they made these changes, or as you said earlier, thousands of years.
Right.
Today, they change in a week a whole tablet of diet depending on what's the novelty of the time.
But it's not even just seeing the individual in a whole, it's seeing them in the context of a whole system, their environment, their community, their family. And to me, part of the value of science is to raise the level of awareness of how much these things matter.
Yes.
You know, I mean, by analogy, when 50 years ago, people would be smoking in this room. Now they're not, because over time, people began to see that's not such a good thing. But again, now that we know how important the social environment is, the connection, the community, how people can use spiritual practices like meditation to quiet down their mind, to experience more of an inner sense of peace and well-being, to directly experience a transcendent state of interconnectedness. These things actually make it much easier for people to change their diet, to quit smoking, to make other lifestyle changes.
And do you think curriculum could work towards that? In other words, if parents had more understanding about developmental issues and understood more about where their children are in these crisis moments, and what importance the family is to connect the child back to that, and then diet as a way of filling the body without having to fill it with all of these other things, do you think that that would make a difference? How would you go about, for example, changing a school curriculum? What would you add to make that change?
Well, I think it's both, the parents and the families and the schools. We need to work on both.
A partnership.
Because, again, so often people think that the time they spend with their families or even with their kids is a luxury. It's what you do, they think, after you've done all the so-called important stuff.
Right.
But when we see how study after study have shown that people who don't have time with their parents, people who feel lonely and depressed, are many times more likely to abuse drugs, to be overweight, to start smoking, to even get sick and die prematurely compared to those who have that sense of family and connection and community. Then we realize that's not the luxury, that is the important stuff. Likewise, in the schools, we view the time we spend in physical education as a luxury, but that's, again, the important stuff. You know, we spend so much time in schools. I mean, think about it, all the time you spent learning trigonometry. You know, how often do you use that in your daily life?
Right.
There's so much stuff we learn in schools that we don't really ever use, and the stuff that's really important,
to
like
be
what
a human
we eat,
being
and how to communicate
nurture.
with other people in ways that don't involve violence, you know, how to create social networks that nurture and support us and teach us to love each other as opposed to, you know, see each other as different and demonize other people and create the cliques and isolation that I think ultimately can lead to violence. These to me are the roots of the obesity epidemic in children. Couple that with the advertising, what we see on television. Now, one of the great things about living in America is that capitalism responds to what consumers want.
Exactly.
And if you talk to, you know, even the major fast food chains, they say, we're not a hamburger company, we're a food distribution company. If people want healthier food, we'll make it.
Yes.
And if people start asking for that, they will. If we want less violence in our films, if we want films that depict healthier environments, healthier ways of, not that everything has to be bland and, you know, the school marm wagging your finger, that's bad, but to find more of a balance and to take some responsibility for the food isn't just what goes in your mouth, it's what goes in your eyes and your ears. And we need to become more mindful of that as well. Not in a repressive way. You know, that's part of the straw man that you often hear when you do work in this area. You know, it's like, are you going to have fun and be hip and cool and do kind of awful things that are self-destructive?
Or are you going to take all these things away from us?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, oh, it's boring, you know. It's like boring. But it isn't. It's like discipline and commitment have this connotation, oh God, that's so boring, you know. Part of what I think we need to teach in our schools is that when you have discipline, you can actually, it frees you. You can express yourself.
So you're teaching really, when you're teaching about diet, you're teaching about life skills also, because that affects how we eat and when we eat and why we eat.
That's right.
But to sort of take that to another place in your diet, not really diet, but in your cookbook, The Diet, really basically says you can eat more and weigh less. And in a sense, eating healthily does do that. Explain that to us.
Well, losing weight, first of all, you're right. I think it's important to put any kind of lifestyle change, including diet, in the larger context.
Right.
Otherwise, people don't even take their pills, much less make lifestyle changes. I mean, telling someone who's lonely and depressed they're going to live longer if they just change their diet or quit smoking or even take their medications does not work. I was profoundly depressed when I was in college. I know how that feels.
Yes.
And if you told me, gosh, I'm going to live to be, you know, 100 if I just change my lifestyle, you say, you don't get it. That's not what's issue. That's not what it's issue for me. So I think it's important that we do put these things in a larger context, as you're saying.
So the landscape for nutrition with obesity and kids is really a landscape of not how you eat, but what you eat and why you eat.
It's all of that. Now,
what could kids do and what could parents do in the house in very practical ways that would teach those good eating habits? What are they?
It's no mystery in how you lose weight. Let's say you're trying to lose weight or your kid's trying to lose weight. It's no mystery. You either burn more calories or you eat fewer calories.
Yes.
You can burn more calories by exercise, and you can eat fewer calories in one of two ways. You eat less food, which is why you can lose weight on any diet. But the problem is, if you go about trying to eat fewer calories by eating less food, you get hungry. Sooner or later, people get tired of feeling hungry. They get off the diet, they gain their weight back, and they usually, you know, blame themselves because they think they didn't have enough willpower or discipline when they were just going about it in the wrong way. The other way to eat fewer calories, besides eating less food, is to change the type of food rather than the amount of food, by eating foods that are less dense in calories. Now, fat has 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbohydrate have only 4. So if you go from eating a high-fat diet to a lower-fat diet,
makes perfect sense.
Even if you eat the same amount of food, you're getting fewer calories, but you're not hungry because you're eating the same amount of food.
So why do you think we don't teach nutrition in school? And why do you think we don't say to these young people, you know, it would be such a great thing not to be so image conscious, but healthy conscious?
Well,
and I think in a certain way, young people are thinking more today of working out and being fit.
I think first of all,
creeping around the corner.
We do need to teach nutrition in schools, and then you don't have to. You can be both have a good image and be healthier. The other thing besides eating less fat is eating less sugar.
Yes.
You can only eat so many fruits and vegetables and grains and beans, and you're going to get full before you get too many calories because they're so rich in fiber. But you can consume virtually unlimited amounts of sugar without getting full. And you get a double whammy because when you eat a lot of sugar, you're not only getting all these calories that don't fill you up, but they make your blood sugar zoom up. Your pancreas then makes insulin to bring your blood sugar back down, which is good, but the insulin accelerates the conversion of calories into fat, so you're more likely to get those, to turn those extra calories into fat at the same time.
Interesting.
Now here again, you know, a lot of soft drink companies have been giving a lot of money to schools to put soft drinks into schools.
Unbelievable, but why are schools going along with that?
Because they need the money, you know, and which is so short-sighted. I mean, we're literally mortgaging our children's future, and we do that. Now, I was reassured to see that recently one of the major soft drink manufacturers said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to pull back. Whether it was because of criticism or whether it was because of wisdom, doesn't matter. At least they're moving in the right direction. But that's still not the norm. And again, as parents, as consumers, as customers, we need to come together and to use the power that we have to influence things that we have more control over than we think, like what's sold in our schools and what's taught in our schools.
So our focus has to really be not so short-sighted. It has to really look at the long result, the long-term result. And we have to make the changes in our home, but we also have to partner with our schools and make sure there's a bridge there so that kids aren't learning one thing at home and another. Why don't you create a curriculum?
Well, I would love to do that. I mean, we're talking about our children, for goodness sake.
Yes, our future.
And if a child has diabetes, they are many times more likely to get heart disease, nerve, eye, kidney damage as they get older.
Yes.
The economic cost alone, not to mention the social and suffering, is horrendous.
Yes.
We can make a difference now if we simply put some resources. A few pennies a day per student in this arena can save thousands of dollars per student later on as they get older.
How do parents disseminate all of this? How do they get through all this information? For example, we're constantly bombarded with ideas. One day we're told, and I know you feel this way, omega-3 is very important, and that you find in fish oil, and that's a good thing. And then another doctor says omega-6 is important, and that's found in olive oil, and I know you think that's not a good thing. Will you explain that to us? And how do parents educate themselves to know what is right? I mean, we're just paralyzed. We're so overstimulated with information.
I know. If we hear this is good for you, then they say it's bad for you, and people say... You know,
ultimately, they end up doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
I think that adds to obesity, tell you the truth.
Well, they say these damn doctors, they can't make up their mind. To hell with them, just bring out the bacon and eggs and don't worry about it.
Exactly.
But actually, if you look at the research, what you find is not how controversial things are, which the media like to highlight as the controversy, but how consistent. That when you eat, to the degree you move towards eating a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet, you know, or some fish, things like that, you're not only reducing your intake of disease-promoting substances like cholesterol, saturated fat, oxidants, and so on, but you're getting thousands of other substances that are protective, that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, anti-aging properties. And with few exceptions, like the omega-3 fatty acids, as you mentioned, with few exceptions, where do you find these protective substances? You find them in fruits and vegetables and grains and beans and soy products. Now, if you teach curriculum to students, one of the things that they found in schools that are beginning to do this is the kids go and teach their parents.
Right.
You know, and they say, Mom, Dad, I love you, don't eat that way.
Yes.
And they begin to influence how the parents are eating rather than just the other way around.
In The King and I, the teacher says, as a teacher I've been learning, and the teacher learns from the children.
And plus, you know, part of what I've also learned is that people will do things for their kids that they won't even do for themselves.
Right.
I mean, I would do anything for my little son, and I'm sure you would for the people that matter to you.
Yes.
And so, if we can again appeal to parents for the sake of their kids, they can begin changing what they serve and how they live and how they eat. As a good example, it will not only help them, but it'll also help their kids too.
Yes, I thank you, Dean. I know that this is going to make a big difference, and I know that in a sense, we do have this huge problem in our culture, this obesity problem, which, as you've pointed out, is connected to other problems, the emotional disconnect that we have, and also social problems that kids have at home and at school. But we have to start somewhere.
Yes.
And you always say start with baby steps.
Yes.
That way you're not so overwhelmed and not trying to change the world overnight. And it's more possible that you feel you can control it. And I think that's a very interesting point.
Well, you know, in summary, the personal choices that we make in our lives and the lives of our kids each day, what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, whether or not we smoke, the quality of our love relationships and our community, these play a much more powerful determinant in our health and our well-being than anything that I or any doctor can do for you.
Yes.
And that when you make these choices, they not only affect you, they affect our society and our culture. And so if not for yourself, do it for your kids and for the rest of us.
Thank you, Dr. Dean Ornish. If what you heard today scared you, maybe that's a good thing. It's never too late to make a change. You don't have to change overnight. Take baby steps before you walk. Don't think of should and shouldn't. Think of all the good choices available to you. Choose a better life. I'm Dr. Gail Gross. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
My great pleasure.